Hello everyone! Are you struggling with finishing your first draft? Were you flying, writing so many words each day, and then you just hit a block and you don't know how to continue? If so, then this video is for you. Today I'll be going over some ways to help finish your first draft. Now, this is a personal problem that I've faced, especially recently in Storm of Blood. I've hit a block and I've been struggling to continue at I think 37,000 words, around there. I was just going through so many each day, and then, well, I've been a bit stuck these last couple of days, so I figured that going over some of the main problems on why you might be blocked, and then going over some solutions might help, both me and you. So before we can get into solutions, we have to address potential problems. Of course, you might just not have one of these problems, and if so, the solutions are not specific to each of them. Yes, some of them do make more sense for certain types of problems, but you can just use whichever works for you, you know? There are about 3 main reasons why you might be lagging. You're getting burnout is one of the biggest ones. You know, you've just written too much or you've been working yourself too hard, especially if you have a normally busy schedule and then trying to do, for example, 2,000 words each day on top. That can be really draining, especially if you don't give yourself breaks. Reason number 2, you may need a plot. If you're like me, you're, well, a pantser, but discovery writer is the other term for it, and you just go with the flow. You kind of start with the general idea, you know, that main first chapter line, and then you continue from there. You don't really know where things are going. That can be a little detrimental, but the solutions are not about mega plots, I promise you. Because I personally am not a plotter by design, but we'll get into that later. And then the third problem could be you fell out of love with your story. I'm also feeling a little bit of this, you know? You've got all these characters, you love them, but it's just, you're kind of sick of them. You're kind of sick of their problems, or you feel like you're going in the wrong direction, or maybe your side character has become more interesting than your main character. Yeah, that would be a bit of a struggle, especially if, you know, you've gotten like 30,000 words in, for example, and then suddenly you're like, I'm writing the wrong story. There are some authors, I cannot remember which one off the top of my head, but some published author, she wrote her entire story and then realized she wrote it with the wrong person's POV. So, don't worry, you can get over that, but anyway, I'm gonna go a little bit more into detail about burnout and why you might need a plot, and then why you might have fell out of love with your story. Just brief, kind of covering each one, and then we'll get on to some of the solutions. I actually have my notes right over there, so that way I keep myself on track and don't make this video too long. Now for burnout, you know, it's just you open up your Word or Google Docs document, and then you sit there, you have like all your music queued up, you've got all the vibes, but then you just kind of blank, and you suddenly just don't want to write. Maybe you want to write something else, or you're just exhausted. That is burnout. I hate burnout. I've had it happen to me before. It's just, you want to write, but it's just the thought of writing just drains you. It's not a fun thing to go through, but sometimes you just need to take a short break. I promise you, burnout is normal, especially if you're doing too much and you have a busy schedule. Needing a plot? Plotters would have more of the opposite problem of this, where their plot is what they've got, right? They have that one train, that one track, but then their story is veering off. And my paper fell. Okay, gonna move that over there. So it's just their plot, where their story's going. That's common. But then you feel a little lost, you know? And then the vice versa, where you're just going along with the flow as a discovery writer. And then suddenly you have no idea what to do. You might need a very general outline. For example, a start and an end. Which, well, obviously a start, but you get what I'm saying. And then maybe if you've fallen out of love with your story, like I said, it could be the wrong characters. You might have the wrong POV characters. You might have just, again, that can be a result of burnout. You might have just, spent a little too much of yourself. For example, that past week, you wrote so much, but you just feel a little drained and a little sick of your characters. So, yeah, I've been feeling that recently, actually. I keep opening that document and staring at my last sentence, and I'm like, I don't know what to do. I don't want to. The best thing you can do is take a couple of days or just a day. It depends on who you are as a person. Just take a break from it. You don't have to work on anything. Maybe read that book that you've been wanting to, but you just haven't. And then come back to it. Or if you've taken that break, just read through your story. You might cringe, but you might realize why you like these characters in this world and this story so much. But let's get more into the solutions. Well, specific solutions instead of just what I was saying. Here. There. You might need... I almost said... I don't even know what I was going to say there. You might need to change your daily goal, or better known as your word count, your page count. Basically, maybe you're writing 2,000 words a day, or maybe you're writing 4 pages a day. That's great, but if it's starting to make you exhausted and make you sick of your characters and make you just not like writing, then that's just one way to fall out of love with your story and to get burnout. I'm not saying you can't write that much, just try to set more realistic goals, especially if you're struggling to meet them. For example, maybe do 1,000 words a day for a week. If you feel better and if you feel like that's more achievable, then keep with it. You've found that rhythm. It takes a while for a writer to find their rhythm. So if you're just constantly changing it, try to figure out what thing works best for you. That might be a playlist, the amount of words you want to write, or even just the area you write. What's the next one? You may need to come up with a basic plot. Now, hearing those words pain me, but it's a little necessary. As a discovery writer, having just some basic idea of what's going on helps you influence the story just enough so that way you're not off in the weeds. And by that I mean knowing the ending, or a major goal. For example, in Storm of Blood, I know the climax and I know the ending. And because of that, I can figure out stuff along the way. Sure, I've added in a little bit to that plot, mostly in my head, I'll admit, but some of it's on my document. But I know where I'm going now. I have a bit of direction, and that's just what I need. Because, honestly, without it, I would still be where chapter 15 is when I need to be on chapter 30. Actually, I am on chapter 30 at the moment, so this plot is working decently. Now this one is going to hurt. You may need to change the story. And it can be something as big as a character shift, like making that side character the main character, or just something like changing the setting. Storm of Blood was originally a steampunk world. After the events of the war, Storm of Blood, Storm and Lancelot had very different things. She had moved on from the war and was still suffering from trauma. And Lancelot was just Lancelot. He didn't have the depth that he has now. And changing the story, even though I was like 20,000 words in, really helped me fall in love with these characters again. Especially because I kept some of them. Like Raphael, he wasn't mentioned in my other video, all about Storm of Blood, which is a crime because he's an awesome character. He just doesn't appear that much. But he appeared in the original draft. And he's back in this one, but he's playing a very different role, and that's what was needed. So sometimes changing the story, yes, it'll hurt sometimes, but it could be for the better. And you don't have to delete your previous draft either. You can compare them and then decide which one you like best. The next reason is, or solution, sorry, you may need to take a break. I already covered this, but even taking a day to do no writing can be really helpful, especially if you're feeling burnout. Because I'll be honest, I've been relaxing my pace probably these past 4 or 5 days because of this just feeling of mild dread when it came to trying to write in Storm of Blood. I wrote some poems, I wrote some other story stuff. While they didn't get very far and I didn't write a lot, I've been feeling more like I can come and tackle Storm of Blood again. And that's sometimes just what's necessary, especially if you push yourself too hard. So make sure that you're setting realistic goals and a realistic pace. And of course, maybe you want to do this, push yourself until you need a break. But I personally wouldn't recommend that because then it becomes a bit of a, oh, well, I have to keep going until I can't anymore. And that's not really a great thing to adopt. And then my final kind of solution, I have just a couple more small ones, but this is one of the big ones, I guess you could say. Do the fun stuff. And by that, I mean like making a mood board or writing that goofy scene that you know you can't put in the story because it's gritty and serious. Those fun little moments that you imagine or that you want to create but you can't put into your main story, do that. Maybe you want to make character playlists. I personally don't do that. I'm not into doing that, but mood boards, I love making mood boards. I actually have one of Storm of Blood, which I may have to show sometime, but it can be very helpful to have. Just do the fun stuff. If you don't want to do the fun stuff, then that's fine. But it can be a way to, relieve your stress. I guess another thing would be don't stop. You can go slow, but if you want to finish that first draft, you do have to keep going. Even if you write 50 words a day, you'll have a finished book. Well, maybe not a book, but you'll have a finished draft. And you need that finished draft to make a novel, to make a book, and to do whatever you plan to do with it. Of course, editing and stuff is definitely a little daunting. I'm a little nervous about when I finally get done with the first draft of Storm of Blood and have to just edit everything because GSO Pete's, going through your writing, you realize that you've got some good stuff, but there's some stuff that you're like, yeesh. And I only know that because I've done some revision exercises on Storm of Blood and other projects, so I have a little experience in that field, but... And then, if you're wired this way, then I guess it might be a little hard to do this next idea, or tip, if you want to call it a tip. Do not edit what you've just written. I know it can be hard to, you're on chapter 3 and you have chapter 1 and 2 perfect, but your story is going to change eventually. That's just how the writing process goes, especially for first drafts. So by reworking those 2 chapters, you're just kind of putting a bit of pressure on yourself, and then you're not letting your story move forward. So I would recommend just trying no editing and see what happens. I personally don't know anyone who does that and, isn't that doesn't take a while, but I guess that's mostly because, it's a big chunk of thing to do, and you're going chapter 1, edit, chapter 2, edit. Just let your story flow. It'll come. It may be bad, but you need the bad to have good. If you don't start out bad, you're never going to get better. So it's okay if your draft has the word said 1,000 times. You can change that in post-editing. It doesn't have to be perfect this first time around. That's why it's a first draft. That's why it's called a rough draft. It's supposed to be rough. There will be some diamonds in the rough, but it doesn't have to be all shimmering smooth. So, I guess that's my little soapbox moment. But that's how to finish your first draft, essentially. Some of the basics. I'm not going to tell you how to do it because of how individualized everyone's writing processes are. But those are some ways to help. Now, make sure to comment, like, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.